Barnaby Whitmore had spent 20 winters in Glacier National Park, but the pounding on his ranger station door at 11:47 p.m. still made his coffee mug tremble in his weathered hands. Outside, November wind howled through the pines near Lake McDonald, carrying the bite of early snow and something else, desperation. He opened the door to find two backpackers, college-aged, the woman clutching her boyfriend's arm while blood seeped through her torn jacket sleeve. Her eyes were wide with shock, mascara streaking down wind-burned cheeks. "Please, you have to help us," the young man gasped. "Something attacked Jenny. A man, but not right, not normal." Barnaby ushered them inside, his 20 years of emergency training kicking in automatically. He examined the wound under his desk lamp. Deep puncture marks, clearly human bite patterns. Too deliberate for an accident, too vicious for horseplay. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency while reaching for his radio. "We were setting up camp near Avalanche Creek," Jenny whispered, her voice shaky. "This naked guy just came out of nowhere, covered in mud and filth. His eyes were wild, like an animal's. He tackled me, bit my arm, tried to drag me into the brush. I threw rocks at him," her boyfriend added. "He made these awful sounds like growling. Then he just vanished back into the trees." Barnaby called his partner, Cordell Pemberton, who arrived within 30 minutes, his face grim in the lamplight. Together, they drove the couple to the clinic in West Glacier, then returned to search the Avalanche Creek area with high-powered flashlights and bear spray. They found the campsite easily: scattered gear, torn fabric caught on branches, and something that made Barnaby's stomach turn. Bare footprints in the mud, toes splayed wide like someone who hadn't worn shoes in years. The prints led toward the old copper mine shafts, abandoned since the 1920s. "Barn," Cordell said quietly, crouching beside the creek. "Look at this." More footprints, but these were different, older, weathered into the bank. A trail that led from the water to the mine entrance, worn smooth by repeated use. They followed the path with caution, calling out ranger identifications and warnings. The mine entrance yawned, black and silent, exhaling stale air that smelled of decay and something else, something organic and wrong. "We need backup for this," Barnaby decided, but Cordell was already shaking his head. "You know what headquarters will say. Vagrant, druggie, maybe some survivalist gone off his meds. They'll want paperwork, not investigations." That night, Barnaby lay awake in his small apartment, thinking about the bite marks and Elena's worried texts from their home in Kalispell. She'd been pressing him about retirement lately, concerned about the increasing dangers of his job. At 52, he was eligible for full pension in 8 years, if he could keep his record clean. So the next morning brought news that made his coffee taste like ash. Cordell arrived with incident reports dating back 6 years, 3 similar attacks, all near the old mining district. Each victim described the same wild-eyed, naked man. Each attack involved human bite marks. Each investigation had been quietly closed as vagrant encounters. "There's more," Cordell said, spreading out yellowed files on Barnaby's desk. "Remember Theron Ashworth?" Barnaby nodded. Theron had been a good ranger, dedicated but increasingly isolated after his divorce. 8 years ago, he'd volunteered for a solo winter patrol near the Continental Divide and never returned. Search and rescue found his truck at a trailhead, his gear scattered in the snow, but no body. "Look at the dates, Barn. First attack was 6 months after Theron disappeared." The implications hit Barnaby like a cold wind. He stared at the patrol map, noting how all the incidents clustered around the abandoned copper mines, a perfect hiding place for someone who knew the backcountry as well as a veteran ranger. That afternoon, they interviewed the previous victims. Each description matched: a feral man with overgrown hair and beard, skin darkened by exposure, moving with unnatural speed through terrain that would challenge experienced hikers. Most disturbing were the details about his eyes. Intelligent, but utterly wild, like he recognized them as human, but no longer shared that classification himself. "He's living up there," Cordell said as they drove back toward the mine complex. "Eating what he can catch, drinking from streams. 8 years of winter survival would change a man." "Into what?" Barnaby asked, but he was beginning to understand. As evening shadows stretched across the valley, they positioned themselves near the mine entrance with night vision equipment borrowed from the Wildlife Division. Barnaby thought about Elena, about their grown children starting careers and safer professions, about the pension that would let them travel together. Then movement caught his eye, a figure emerging from the mine shaft as darkness fell, moving with the fluid caution of a predator. Even from a distance, Barnaby recognized the remnants of a Park Service uniform, faded and torn, but unmistakably Ranger green. The figure that had once been Theron Ashworth raised his head, sniffing the air, and turned hollow eyes in their direction. The creature that had once been Theron Ashworth moved with predatory grace, his bare feet silent on the rocky ground. 8 years of mountain survival had transformed him into something barely recognizable, skin weathered to leather, fingernails grown into yellowed claws, muscles lean and ropey beneath matted hair that hung past his shoulders. Barnaby's hand moved instinctively to his radio, but Cordell caught his wrist, shaking his head. They watched in horrified fascination as Theron approached a stream, crouching to drink with his face buried in the water like an animal. "Jesus," Cordell whispered. "Look at his back." Scars crisscrossed Theron's shoulders and spine, old wounds from countless encounters with branches, rocks, and whatever else lurked in these mountains during brutal winters. But he was alive, impossibly alive, in conditions that should have killed him years ago. Theron suddenly froze, head snapping up with water dripping from his beard. His eyes locked onto their hiding spot with predatory intensity. For a moment that stretched like eternity, man and beast regarded each other across the growing darkness. Then Theron smiled, a terrible expression that revealed broken, yellowed teeth filed to points. "Run," Barnaby breathed. Theron moved with inhuman speed, covering ground in bounding leaps that spoke of years adapting to mountain terrain. Barnaby and Cordell crashed through underbrush toward their patrol vehicle, branches tearing at their uniforms as something howled behind them, a sound that was neither fully human nor entirely animal. They reached the truck as Theron burst from the tree line, his ranger badge still glinting on the tattered remains of his shirt. Barnaby gunned the engine, tires spinning on loose gravel as Theron slammed into the passenger side window, his face pressed against the glass in a grotesque parody of recognition. For one terrifying moment, intelligence flickered in those wild eyes. Theron remembering, perhaps, who these men were, what he had once been. Then the moment passed, and he was bounding back into the forest with impossible agility. They drove in silence to headquarters, where Barnaby faced the choice that would define his remaining years of service. Report a fellow ranger transformed into something monstrous, or find another way to protect the public without destroying careers, including his own. "We can't kill him," Cordell said finally. "He's still human, still Theron." "Is he?" Barnaby stared at the incident reports. "Would you want to live like that? Would you want your family to see you that way?" Over the following weeks, they implemented an unofficial containment strategy, increased patrols around the mining district, subtle route changes to steer hikers away from Theron's territory, and most importantly, a cover story about unstable mine shafts requiring indefinite area closure. The attack stopped, but Barnaby knew Theron was still out there. Sometimes, checking remote trail cameras, he'd find footage of a figure moving through moonlit clearings, always at the edge of the frame, always watching. Elena noticed the change in him immediately. He startled at unexpected sounds, checked locks twice before bed, and spent hours staring at topographical maps of the backcountry. When she asked about early retirement, he found himself considering it seriously for the first time. "Something happened out there," she said one evening, watching him clean his service weapon with unusual thoroughness. "You can tell me, Barn." But how could he explain that one of his brothers in service had become something that haunted the mountains like a fever dream? How could he admit that every ranger knew, deep down, how thin the line was between civilization and the wild? 3 months later, Cordell found Theron's body during a routine patrol, or what remained of it. A late spring avalanche had sealed the main mine entrance, and Theron had apparently been trapped inside. The official report listed him as a vagrant who'd been squatting in abandoned structures. At the brief memorial service, attended only by a handful of rangers and Theron's ex-wife Delphine, Barnaby wondered if his old colleague had found peace at last, or if something essential had died in those mountains years before his body finally followed. That night, he submitted his retirement paperwork, effective in 18 months. Some territories, he decided, were meant to remain wild, and some transformations couldn't be undone, only contained. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind moved through the pines just right, Barnaby still heard echoes of that inhuman howl, reminding him that the wilderness never truly released what it claimed. Wallace Pemberton had completed his morning briefing at Cataract Falls Ranger Station, collecting his assignments for the day's patrol of the Appalachian Heritage Trail. At 52, he was a man whose weathered hands and steady gaze commanded respect among both colleagues and the mountain communities he served. His route would take him through Section 7 of the trail, winding deep into the Cherokee hunting grounds, where cell towers couldn't reach and the old-growth forest pressed close against narrow pathways. Wally preferred these solitary patrols through the Deep Creek watershed. There was something meditative about walking trails his grandfather had known, understanding the subtle rhythms of the Smoky Mountains, noticing when something didn't belong in the ancient ecosystem. After 22 years of service, these mountains had become as familiar as his own backyard in Gatlinburg. It was approaching 3 o'clock when Wally spotted the backpack resting against a moss-covered boulder beside the trail marker for mile 7.3. He had been walking for nearly 6 hours, his boots finding purchase on the familiar rocky terrain with practiced ease. The backpack sat upright, deliberately positioned as if someone had carefully placed it there before continuing onward. The pack was clean, recent, not weathered by mountain storms or overgrown with the kudzu that claimed abandoned items within weeks. Wally approached it with the caution of someone who had seen too many search and rescue operations begin with similar discoveries. His radio crackled with static, no signal this deep in the watershed. Opening the pack revealed the contents of a planned day hike: a water bottle nearly full, a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in plastic, fresh enough that he could smell the ham and Swiss cheese, a lightweight rain jacket folded with military precision, a trail map of the Deep Creek area marked with a route extending only another 2 miles beyond this location, and buried beneath the practical items, a leather-bound journal. Wally opened the journal with the methodical care of someone trained in preserving evidence. The handwriting belonged to someone educated, deliberate. The earlier entries, dated 3 days prior, chronicled the hikers' arrival in Gatlinburg, excitement about exploring the historic Cherokee territories, plans to complete the marked trail section before evening. The name on the inside cover read, Thornton Ashford, Vanderbilt University History Department. The most recent entry was dated that morning, written before dawn. Wally read the final words, and they caused him to pause in the mountain stillness. The entry stated, "The old-timers at the diner weren't joking about the watcher. I heard it before sunrise, something large moving through the trees behind my campsite, branches breaking under significant weight, but when I called out, everything went silent. The silence is worse than the sounds. Cherokee legends speak of guardians in these mountains, protectors that became something else after the removal. I'm hiking the trail anyway. I need to document what I find. If something happens to me, this journal should reach someone who understands the history of this place." That was the final entry. Wally radioed base station, but received only static. He marked his GPS coordinates and began the hike back toward signal range. Within 2 hours, District Ranger Dixon Rutherford had arrived with a search team led by Beauregard Weatherby, the most experienced tracker in 3 counties. They began systematic grid searches expanding outward from the backpack's location. Hours passed as afternoon shadows lengthened between the ancient trees. The search team called for dogs trained in locating missing persons. The bloodhounds became agitated at a point roughly 400 yards from where the pack was discovered. The dogs led handlers to a small clearing where the ground showed signs of disturbance. Undergrowth flattened as if something heavy had moved through, but no clear tracks, no blood, no torn clothing, no signs of struggle. What they found was a single hiking boot, laces still tied, positioned carefully on a flat stone as if someone had removed it while standing and placed it with deliberate precision. The search continued into the evening, extending through the following day. Rangers from adjoining districts joined the effort. A helicopter equipped with thermal imaging swept the canopy above Deep Creek. Thornton Ashford was never found. That evening, Wally completed his incident report, documenting every detail. The case was filed as an open investigation, but something had shifted within him during those hours of searching the mountain wilderness. He found himself thinking about Ashford's reference to Cherokee legends, about the diner conversation with old-timers who knew these mountains before tourism changed everything. 3 weeks later, Wally made a decision that would consume him. He accessed the ranger station's archived missing person files, pulling cases from the past 2 decades. He was searching for patterns, for any indication that what happened to Thornton Ashford wasn't isolated. What he discovered disturbed him profoundly. The first case dated to 2003. A hiker named Meridian Blackstone had vanished from Section 7 of the Appalachian Heritage Trail, leaving behind a backpack and journal. The journal's final entry mentioned something watching from the tree line. Another case from 2007. Fletcher Grimwood disappeared from the same general area. His journal described heavy footsteps circling my camp after midnight. Then 2010, 2013, 2016, 2019. 6 cases spanning 16 years. 6 hikers vanished from the Deep Creek watershed. 6 journals were covered with final entries describing an unseen presence in the forest. All filed separately, investigated individually, with no connections drawn between them. Wally spread the journals across his dining room table at home, while his wife Constance worked late at the county library. He began reading chronologically, creating a timeline not just of disappearances, but of the behavioral patterns described by the missing hikers. The entity haunting the Deep Creek watershed followed a predictable pattern. It would announce its presence to hikers in the early morning hours, allowing them to proceed with their planned route while maintaining audible distance. Then, at the same geographic point marked on each victim's trail map, mile 7.3 near the old Cherokee boundary stones, that the pursuit would intensify. The journals described a moment of acceleration where the sounds of something massive moving through the forest would grow louder, closer. Some hikers wrote about running in panic down the mountain trail. Others described standing their ground, attempting to confront whatever stalked them through the ancient trees. In every case, that was where the entries ended. No final words, no explanations, just blank pages that followed. Wally became obsessed with understanding the pattern. He spent his off-duty hours hiking Section 7, staying alert for unusual wildlife behavior or signs that might explain the disappearances. He interviewed older rangers who had worked these mountains during previous decades, men like himself approaching retirement, who remembered when tourism was lighter and the forest felt different. He spoke with Cherokee elders who still lived in the area, asking careful questions about traditional stories of watchers and guardians. What he learned unsettled him. The legend spoke of protectors who had become twisted after the forced removal of 1838, spirits that no longer distinguished between those who belonged in the mountains and those who didn't. The disappearances occurred irregularly, sometimes years apart, following no seasonal pattern. But the geographic location remained constant. The same section of trail where Cherokee hunting parties once made offerings to mountain spirits, where old-growth forest created cathedral-like spaces between massive trees that had witnessed centuries of human passage. Wally began experiencing symptoms that concerned his wife Constance. He started having trouble sleeping, his mind replaying details from the journals. He became distant during family dinners, distracted by thoughts of the missing hikers and whatever force had claimed them. His world narrowed to focus exclusively on solving the mystery that his colleagues either couldn't see or chose to ignore. One afternoon, District Ranger Dixon Rutherford approached Wally privately at the station. Rutherford expressed concern about his mental state and recent behavior. Colleagues had noticed that he seemed obsessed with archived cases, asking unusual questions about Cherokee folklore, spending extraordinary amounts of time on research unrelated to current duties. Rutherford suggested that Wally consider taking vacation time, perhaps speaking with the department's counselor. Wally felt frustration building. He wanted to explain the pattern he had discovered, the remarkable connections spanning decades. But he sensed that his supervisor would dismiss him as paranoid or unstable. So Wally agreed to take 2 weeks off, though he had no intention of resting. Instead, he planned an unauthorized expedition into the Deep Creek watershed. He would follow the exact route marked in each victim's trail map, carrying recording equipment, a satellite beacon, and enough supplies for several days in the wilderness. He was determined to either find evidence of what happened to the missing hikers or encounter the phenomenon that claimed them. Wally told Constance he was going fly fishing at Fontana Lake. He followed the Heritage Trail over 3 days, retracing paths described in the journals. He reached mile 7.3 as evening approached on the second day, making camp where he believed the final encounters had occurred. That night, alone in the mountain darkness, Wally documented his observations into a digital recorder. He described the forest sounds around him, the temperature, wind direction, his growing sense of unease as darkness deepened. He noted everything with scientific precision while acknowledging his increasing dread. What occurred during those hours remained unclear, even in Wally's later recounting. His recordings became fragmented, incoherent. There were periods of silence lasting hours, followed by whispered observations so quiet they were barely audible on playback. When morning came, Wally emerged from the forest fundamentally changed. He filed no official report about his expedition. When colleagues asked directly, he stated simply that he had encountered nothing unusual, but something in his eyes had shifted, a knowledge he couldn't or wouldn't articulate. 6 months later, Wally took early retirement from the National Park Service. He moved with Constance to Knoxville, leaving the mountains that had defined his adult life. Before departing, he carefully organized all 7 journals and sealed them in an envelope marked, "For Beauregard Weatherby, open if anything happens to me." Beau Weatherby still works Deep Creek watershed searches. The envelope remains in his possession, unopened. The missing hikers have never been found, and Section 7 of the Appalachian Heritage Trail continues welcoming visitors who hike unknowing through hunting grounds where something ancient still watches, still waits, still chooses. Wendell Kirkpatrick had spent 25 years walking the backcountry trails of Shenandoah National Park, and he prided himself on knowing every switchback, every creek crossing, every wind-carved outcrop along the Blue Ridge. At 54, he was the kind of ranger younger staff looked to for answers. Methodical, unflappable, with a reputation built on decades of solid service. Eleanor often joked that he knew these mountains better than their own backyard. The October morning that changed everything started like any other. Wendell locked the ranger station at dawn, the air crisp with the promise of winter, and headed toward the Appalachian Trail maintenance sector. His assignment was routine: inspect the overlook near the old Civil War battlefield site, check for storm damage from the previous week's weather. The mist hung low between the ridges, and the familiar crunch of leaves beneath his boots provided the only soundtrack to his solitude. He'd been walking for 40 minutes when he noticed the footprints. Clear, distinct boot treads in the soft earth beside the trail. Park Service issue, like his own. Wendell paused, checking his assignment sheet. No other rangers were scheduled for this sector today. He'd specifically requested to work alone, wanting to complete the inspection without the chatter of a junior partner. The prints were fresh, maybe an hour old. Someone had passed this way before dawn. Wendell continued up the trail, his curiosity sharpening. At the next bend, he caught sight of a figure ahead, broad shoulders beneath a ranger jacket, the familiar silhouette of the wide-brimmed hat. The man stood motionless, facing the valley overlook where morning light was just beginning to burn through the fog. "Morning," Wendell called out as he approached. "Didn't expect company up here today." The figure didn't respond. As Wendell drew closer, something about the man's stillness troubled him. The ranger jacket looked worn, almost threadbare, and the fabric had a strange quality in the shifting light. Too dark, too heavy for current issue uniforms. "Excuse me," Wendell said again, louder this time. The man turned slowly, and Wendell felt his breath catch. The face was pale, waxy, with eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. The ranger badge on his chest was tarnished, the lettering in an old serif font that hadn't been used in decades. "You're off your route," the man said, in a voice like wind through dead leaves. Wendell's hand instinctively moved to his radio. "I'm sorry. Who are you? I don't recognize you from district meetings." But when he looked up again, the man was gone, vanished between one heartbeat and the next, leaving only the whisper of wind in the pines and the acrid scent of old smoke. Wendell spent the next hour searching the area, examining every tree, every rock outcrop where someone might have hidden. He found nothing, no footprints leading away, no disturbed vegetation, nothing to explain where the figure had gone. Finally, he keyed his radio. "Station, this is Kirkpatrick. I need to verify. Is there anyone else assigned to the battlefield overlook sector today?" Delbert Ashford's voice crackled back through the static. "Negative, Wendell. You're solo today, just like you requested. Why? You see a hiker up there?" Wendell hesitated. In 25 years of service, he'd built his reputation on facts, on measurable observations. He wasn't about to compromise that now with talk of mysterious figures and disappearing men. "Just checking," he said. "Thought I saw someone, but probably just a trick of the light through the fog." He completed his inspection mechanically, but the feeling of being watched never left him. Every shadow seemed to hold potential movement. Every rustling branch might hide an observer. By the time he returned to the station, Wendell's nerves were stretched thin. That evening, he He mentioned the incident to Eleanor over dinner, keeping his tone casual. "Strangest thing happened today. Could have sworn I saw another ranger up on the battlefield trail, but dispatch says nobody was assigned there." Eleanor looked up from her grading. Maybe it was someone from maintenance, or a supervisor doing a spot check. "Maybe," Wendell agreed, but he didn't believe it. The image of that pale face and those dead eyes lingered in his memory like a photograph burned into film. Later that night, unable to sleep, Wendell found himself in his home office, poring over old park personnel files. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Some explanation, some rational answer to what he'd witnessed. The records went back decades, yellowed folders containing the bureaucratic debris of careers long ended. In a box marked "Historical Personnel, Deceased," he found a file that made his blood run cold. The photograph clipped to the inside cover showed a young man in an old-style ranger uniform, the same serif font badge Wendell had seen that morning. The name typed below read Balthazar Drummond, 1959-1962. According to the file, Ranger Drummond had died in a flash flood while investigating reports of lost hikers near the battlefield overlook. His body was never recovered. The date of death was October 15th, 1962, exactly 61 years ago to the day. Wendell closed the file with trembling hands. Tomorrow, he would return to the battlefield trail. He had to know if what he'd seen was real, or if 25 years of mountain solitude had finally taken its toll on his sanity. Outside his window, the Blue Ridge stretched away into darkness, holding its secrets close. The next morning brought a heavy fog that clung to the mountainsides like smoke from old battlefields. Wendell arrived at the trailhead earlier than usual, carrying the personnel file in his jacket pocket like a talisman against the inexplicable. He'd barely slept. The image of Balthazar Drummond's photograph burned into his memory. Eleanor had noticed his restlessness. "Maybe you should take a sick day," she'd suggested over coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Her choice of words had made him flinch. Now, walking the same trail where he'd encountered the figure, Wendell felt the weight of the mountains pressing down on him. The fog muffled every sound, turning familiar landmarks into alien shapes. He moved carefully, every sense alert for signs of another presence. At the overlook, he stopped and pulled out the file. The photograph showed Drummond standing in almost the exact spot where Wendell had seen the figure yesterday. The same rock formation, the same view across the valley, only the trees were smaller, younger in the old picture. "Balthazar Drummond," Wendell said aloud, testing the name. "Is that you out here?" The fog seemed to thicken in response, and somewhere in the distance, he heard the sound of boots on stone. Slow, measured footsteps approaching through the mist. Wendell's hand moved to his radio, but he didn't key it. What would he say? That he was talking to a dead man? That 30 years of building a solid reputation was about to crumble because of some impossible encounter? The footsteps stopped. Through the gray veil of fog, a shape materialized. The same figure as before, standing perhaps 20 feet away. This time, Wendell forced himself to study the apparition carefully. The uniform was definitely vintage, probably late 1950s issue. The man's face was young, maybe 30, with the kind of earnest expression common in old Park Service photographs. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said, and his voice carried a strange echo, as if it came from the bottom of a deep well. "Neither should you," Wendell replied, surprised by his own boldness. "You died 61 years ago." The ghost of Balthazar Drummond tilted his head, and something that might have been a smile crossed his pale features. "Time moves different up here. Some of us never really leave our posts." "What happened to you?" "Flash flood came down the ravine. I was searching for lost hikers. A family from Richmond got turned around in weather just like this." Drummond's form flickered like a television with poor reception. "Never found them. Never made it home to Martha and the baby." Wendell felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "Why are you showing yourself to me?" "Because you understand duty. 25 years walking these trails. You know what it means to protect this place." Drummond moved closer, and Wendell caught the scent of old rain and wet leaves. "But there's something you need to know, something the files don't tell you." The fog began to lift slightly, revealing the battlefield overlook in partial clarity. Drummond pointed toward a cluster of rocks near the edge of the promontory. "The hikers I was looking for, they're still out there, still lost. still calling for help on nights when the fog rolls in like this. His voice grew fainter. I've been trying to guide them home for 61 years, but I can't leave my post, can't abandon my sector. Wendell stared at the rocks, and for a moment he thought he heard something. Distant voices, faint cries for help echoing through the mist. What do you want me to do? Help me finish what I started. Help me bring them home so we can all rest. The fog thickened again, and Drummond's figure began to fade. Tonight, when the mist rises, come back tonight and listen for their voices. Help me end this watch. Wait, Wendell called out, but the ghost was gone, leaving only the whisper of wind through the trees and the lingering scent of rain from decades past. That evening, Wendell sat across from Eleanor at their kitchen table, picking at his dinner. Outside, fog was already beginning to gather in the valleys. You're going back up there, aren't you? Eleanor said quietly. He looked at her, startled. How did you... 27 years of marriage, Wendell. I know when something's eating at you. She reached across the table and took his hand. Whatever's up there, whatever you think you saw, be careful. An hour later, Wendell was climbing the battlefield trail by flashlight, the beam cutting weakly through fog so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. His radio crackled with static, occasionally picking up fragments of voices that might have been dispatch or might have been something else entirely. At the overlook, he waited. The fog pressed around him like a living thing, and in its depths, he began to hear them. Distant voices calling for help. The sound of a family lost in time, still wandering these mountains after 61 years. Wendell keyed his radio. This is Ranger Kirkpatrick, he said into the static. I'm conducting a search and rescue operation. Lost hikers, last seen near Battlefield Overlook. Requesting backup. Through the fog, he saw Balthazar Drummond appear one final time, and the Ghost Ranger nodded before pointing deeper into the mist where the voices of the lost family grew stronger. Wendell stepped forward into the gray unknown, finally understanding that some duties transcend death, and that the best rangers never truly leave their posts. They just expand their territory to include the spaces between worlds. Behind him, his radio crackled one last time. Copy that, Kirkpatrick. Help is on the way. On the